Welcome back. Now, in the last video, we built the patient management module. Now, in this video, we're going to create a new page to manage the medical services that are offered at the clinic. So things like x-rays, lab tests, physical therapy, those things are services. Now, services are a core part of how the clinic works. And each patient's visit is going to be linked to one of these services later on. So to begin with, let's go ahead and create a new file inside our admin folder called services.php. So this file is going to be the file which is going to manage and handle the services that are being offered at our medical clinic. Now, this page structure is going to be very similar to what we just did earlier in the previous video for patients. We're going to have a form, and that form is going to be able to allow the user to add new services, and the form is also going to allow the user to update services or to update a service. Below that form, we're also going to display a table which is going to display all of the services that are currently being housed in our database. So let's jump right into it and begin to create. So one of the first things that we always do is we include the files that are going to be necessary to allow our services file to work. So I'm going to open my PHP tags, and below that, I'm going to include the two files that are necessary in order for us to be able to connect to our database and to check whether the user is actually logged in. So that would be our DB Connect and our auth check. After that, we can then go ahead and we can basically go ahead and add a service. Now, adding a service, okay, is going to take in information from the user. And in order to take information in from the user, we're going to need a form. So let's go ahead and build out what we need to be able to access what the user is putting in. So I'm going to put in my HTML boilerplate, and I'm going to close off my PHP tag because we need to let the page know that we are starting HTML. I'm going to change the title of my page to Manage Services. And inside the body, I am also going to put in an H1, and that H1 is going to have a heading of Manage Medical Services. Additionally, I'm also inside my PHP tags going to create a message variable, just like we had before. And we already know from our last couple videos why we are doing this. I'm going to set it equal to an empty pair of quotes. So since we have a message variable that we're going to use to output messages to our user, below my H1, I'm going to echo this out by using our PHP shorthand and echoing out message. Okay, I already have my form built out, and I'm going to copy it and paste it in. And remember, you can always pause the video and go ahead and create your form. Now notice that my form only has a field for putting in the ID and a field for putting in the name. And then we have our two buttons, add and update. Now, if we go to our database, we would notice that our services table indeed only has two columns, one for ID and one for name. So that makes our form pretty short. I'm going to add some CSS stylings. So I'm going to create our link here for CSS, and it is going to be pointing to //CSS and styles.css. So let's see if we can get a little preview of what our page looks like. I'm going to go over to here. Currently not logged in, so I'm going to log in. Make sure I type this correctly. Okay, of course, we don't have a dashboard as yet, so I'm going to navigate my way to our services.php page by simply typing it into our browser URL. And here we have our form with our ID field only for updating and our service name. So let's go ahead and continue. So now that I have my form, I'm going to go ahead and build out the two structures for adding and updating independently. So I'm going to put another comment here for updating a service. And under these comments, we're going to build out what it is that we need. Now, we are simply going to create something very similar to what we did in Patience. So I'm actually going to copy what we have here just to avoid having to type all of this again. So I'm going to go into my patience.php and I'm actually going to copy our add function here and I'm going to paste it here. And we're going to edit it to make sure that we have what it is that we need. So here I'm going to leave, sorry, this very first line because remember, this is our add a service and we have a button for adding a service. So we're going to leave this very first line, but we're going to go over to where we're pulling the information from the database, sorry, from the form. So the information we're pulling from the form is actually going to be a name because remember we're only putting in an ID if we are we're only putting in an ID if we actually are going to be updating a service. If we're adding a service, the ID is going to be put in automatically. So in this case, we are simply going to be putting in the name. Okay, so I can remove the other two that I had here, and we are simply going to be putting in an SQL injection protected name, and we're also going to trim it to strip whatever possible blank spaces may be at the front or back of whatever the user has put into the name field. Now, since name is the only thing that we're entering, we can then remove these additional empty checks and we can say if name is empty, then we have an error being put into message where we can possibly say a service name is required. Else, we are going to insert into somewhere, but we need to adjust this a little bit. So we are going to insert into services a value, okay, and we're actually going to insert into services name, which is the column, values, and the value is going to be the name that the user is putting in. That is going to be sent to our database, and if it is successful, then we're going to have a message here saying service added successfully. Brilliant. And in the same vein, we're going to go to our patients.php, and we're also going to copy across our updating system as well. So I'm going to copy this, okay? And I'm going to go over to my services, and I'm going to paste it below my comment here so we can edit it so that it can work just for services. Now remember, okay, we don't have to change anything in this first statement. Why? Because we know that just like before, just from our like before our in our patients.php, we're actually looking for the method to be post and the button to have been clicked being update. We also, in this form, are accepting an ID when we're updating. So the ID being put in here and being trimmed is correct, but we don't need to have all of these others because the only two fields used in services is ID and the name of the service. So we delete these two so we can proceed. In this case, we now are putting in two fields of information. So if the ID field is empty and the name field is empty, and we can get rid of these others. And now we can produce a helpful message that says both ID and service name are required for updating. So if it is empty, or if one of them are empty, either ID or name, then it's going to say both ID and service name are required for updating. Otherwise, if everything is fine, then we need to push our query. We need to update our services table. So let's remove this line here and replace it with a new update query. We're going to update services. We're going to set name to be equal to what the user has put in, which is name, okay, where the ID equals what the user has put in, which is $ID. And once again, we do not need to put this in quotations because we're not passing it through as strings. Okay, and we can save and format our document. So now we need to give a relevant message. We're not working on patients anymore. We can say service updated successfully. So now we have a proper form where we can update our services. So if I want to add a new service, I can put in a service. Let me see what services that we have. General consultation, vaccination, blood test, ECG, wound dressing. So let's say we want to put in a service called EKG. Okay, and I can say add a service, and it says service added successfully. So when I go back to my services table and I refresh, we see that there is now a number 6, which is EKG. Now we can also update a service, so maybe we don't want it to be called EKG. or just, to be called EKG, simply you want to add something to it. We know that the ID is 6 and the name is EKG. So if I go here, I can put in the ID of 6, and I don't want to call it EKG. I can call it EKG, um, I don't know, scanning. Okay. And I can update the service, and it says service updated successfully. And when I refresh, it's now called EKG scanning. Now, this table is only visible if we are going into our database backend and seeing the information. In order to update services, we need to at least have a table here where we can view all of the information from the table in this place here. And also, we want to be able to delete any services that we don't need anymore. So let's deal with the table first of all. Now, in the patients example, when we looked at patients, we saw that we created a new query which would pull all of the patients and store it in a patient's variable. In this case, we need to go ahead and we need to create a variable that's going to store all of the services if we pull them from our table. So I can go here and I can create a new variable called services, and I can set services equal to pretty much something similar to this. I'm going to copy that one here. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go over to services and I'm going to paste this. And we're going to update our query to say select all from services and order by ID in descending order. So now it's pulling that, and we now need to go ahead and create our table. So I'm going to go below my form. I'm going to put in an horizontal rule, and below that horizontal rule, I'm going to put in a H2 all services. Same thing as what we did for our patients, but with much less information. Now, to keep things simple and to save ourselves a fair bit of work, right, we can start our table. So I can open my table tags. I can put in my first row, table row, which is going to contain my headings. So I'm going to put in one table heading called ID, another table heading for name, and another table heading for actions under which we will see the delete link. Okay. Now, if we go back to our patients.php, we'll see that we have this little structure right here. Okay. And we can actually copy all of this all the way down to the end while. And we can copy this structure and use it for our services table. So we're going to put it right below the first row of headings. Now let's adjust this so that it fits what we're doing here. To begin with, we know that we do not need to have any of the email and phone information, so we can take that out. We also know that we are pulling our information, okay, from our database. We are storing the resulting information in our row array, and the information that we are actually working on is not patients, but our services, which is being stored all the way up here when we sent our query to our database. So now we have our row ID and row name forming the rows of our table with a while loop actually repeating for each row instance. So similarly, all right, similarly, I am going to also change delete patient to delete service. Okay. And this is a file that currently does not exist, but we're going to create it. And I'm also going to put in my link, which will take us back to our dashboard. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to copy this very link here, and I'm going to paste it for our services below our table. And it's going to take us back to our dashboard. And the dashboard we have not created as yet. So once we do this, let's go back to our services table and refresh. Okay, as a matter of fact, let's not refresh because it's going to keep adding, stuff. So let us, and right away, we see that we have all of our services being listed here with our back to dashboard link. Wonderful. So now, at this point, I have a challenge for you. And what is the challenge? The challenge is that earlier on we created a delete patients.php file for deleting a patient when the delete button would be clicked. I want you to now, I'm challenging you now to create the delete services.php file. So right in here in our admin, we're going to create a delete underscore services.php file. And that file is going to be used to delete a service anytime the link is clicked on the page to delete the relevant service. It's the two files, the delete patient and delete services are very similar. There's just a couple things that you will have to change in order to get it to work properly. That is your challenge, and good luck with it. In our next video, we're going to move forward and we're going to look at working with our visits. And later on, we're going to work with creating our very informative dashboard. See you then.